Chamillionaire and Paul Wall, two Texas legends, both came in the game and made their impact in their own respective ways and left their mark on history. At the time, they were very close with each other, but differences between them led to them separating, with tension brewing between the two. I don't want to hold y'all too much, but before I get more into the video, I would first like to thank you guys for coming to see this, because you guys can be doing a million other things right now, but instead, you're here with me, and I appreciate that. If you guys like the content, you guys should like, comment, and subscribe to help the channel grow. Also, follow my Instagram too. That would be greatly appreciated. Comment down below your favorite tracks or albums from Chamillionaire or Paul Wall, or your favorite project of them together. Also, let me know where you are tuning in from. Represent where you're from, especially if you're from Texas. Without further ado, I give you Paul Wall vs. Chamillionaire, the story behind the beef. Before we get into what happened between Chamillionaire and Paul Wall, we must learn the backstory behind these two and how they came together. Let's start off with Paul Wall. Paul Wall was born Paul Slayton in Houston, Texas in March of 1981. Paul grew up on the north side of Houston, and he said that he didn't have a lot of money growing up. He has said that he definitely didn't have it the worst where he was growing up, but he definitely did not have it the best. He was abused by his dad, who was a drug addict. I say that to say that Paul hasn't seen his real dad since he was 5 years old, and for a period of time, Paul just had his mom, and they were broke. His dad's side of the family had money according to him, but it didn't help them out. There's more to the story when it comes to Paul and his dad growing up, and if you want to know more about it, I'm going to show a few interviews you can watch where he really goes into detail, since I don't want to drag on that topic. But also, where Paul grew up was very diverse. You had your Asians, Mexicans, whites, etc. You would think that growing up, Paul was bullied by blacks because he was white, and I even seen recently, like a couple months ago, where Paul Wall was trending because someone was questioning his authenticity. There was people thinking he was acting street or whatever, but I don't think that that's the case, and that Paul is actually just a product of his environment. Paul was actually bullied by white kids growing up who would do things like tie him to a tree and put lunch meat on his face and let dogs loose on him. They would also make Paul Wall lay in the middle of the street, and kids would throw golf balls at him if he moved. Cars would come and stop, which would lead to Paul getting up and the kids running away. Now with Chamillionaire, about how he grew up, he said this in an interview. I had to deal with the same struggles that any other low-income family child growing up. Domestic violence and my mom working 2 jobs to maintain were some of the type of things that I was dealing with. There used to be a lot of tension between the North 7 South side of Houston for a while, but that was a phase that kind of disappeared. Cam fell in love with rap music early on, but didn't realize he was going to be able to do it for a living until he started making a lot of money doing it later on in life. Him and Paul knew of each other since they were little kids. Here's a clip of Paul and Cam talking about their come up together. This clip is from around 2001, I believe.
Man, me and Chamillionaire, you know what I'm saying, we started off as water boys in the game, man. We was passing out flyers, you know what I'm saying, we was DJing, throwing parties, man, we did everything. We used to be the bouncers at the club, the doorman, you know what I'm saying, taking the door stuff. But really, man, what we was really hot on was promotions, man. We was the water boys, man. You know what I'm saying, we started at the bottom and worked our way up to the top. That's how we got in cool with Watts, and you know what I'm saying, we of course rap, we did our own thing, and then, you know what I'm saying, good mind thinks alike, you know what I'm saying. You know how the fairy tale goes. You know, great minds think alike. We came together, collaborated with Watts, and you know, one thing led to another, and it was like, you know what I'm saying, Bill Gates, you know what I'm saying? You don't want to say it. We took over the game.
Y'all tell the truth.
That's what happened, man. We took over the game.
Man, how did y'all two boys hook up, man? I mean, grew up together?
Me and Paul, we known each other since we was this high, man, you know what I'm saying? 6 years old, man.
That's lovely.
That's why we vibe so good together, you know
what school y'all went to?
Oh, man, that's all.
So as you heard, pretty much they both had to work from the ground up in the industry. They hosted parties, were bouncers, passed out flyers, and did a bunch of other stuff to get into the door. They were doing things for Masterpiece No Limit Records at a point in time, and eventually they went on to work for Michael Watts' Swishahouse label. This is what Paul Wall had to say about when he first started working for Swishahouse. When I got to work doing other things for Michael Watts and Ron C, of course I always wanted to rap with them, but I didn't think it was a possibility. I never asked because I didn't think it was possible. I was rapping at the time, our group was the Sleepwalkers, and we were trying to do our thing, but it was more like a hobby. We'd go pay for studio time, perform here and there, the same thing everybody always do. The Sleepwalkers was a group Cam and Paul was in before they got to the color changing click days, according to the 4th installment in the Beef series. In 1999, after listening to Paul and Cam's demo, Michael Watts would record some tracks and start putting them on Swishahouse mixtapes. Now for those who don't know, Swishahouse is a legendary Texas-based independent music label. At the time, the demo Paul and Cam recorded was gaining some traction, but Swishahouse wasn't an official label yet, so instead Paul and Cam jumped ship to a label called Paid in Full that their friends owned and ran. Here is Cam and Paul talking further about the situation and what their plans were around 2001.
What made y'all make the break from just being with the Swishahouse to having your own color changing click, the whole click going down?
It's like, you know what I'm saying, when you Michael Jordan playing on the basketball team, you know what I'm saying, you don't want to ride the bench.
Already.
And that's basically what it was. So we just kind of, you know what I'm saying, we took it upon ourselves to just, well, shoot, we got the talent, you know what I'm saying, we got the brains, you know what I'm saying. And we got the family, we got the love, you know what I'm saying, with us three and Lil Twin, 50-50.
Already.
50-50, you know what I'm saying?
Like the roots off.
Before we took matters into our own hands, you know what I'm saying? So we got love for, we always gonna have love for watching Ron C.
Already.
But you know what I'm saying, other than that, you know what I'm saying, it's like we just had to do our own thing.
Already. What's the next album coming out, cuz? I know y'all got Babushi out right now.
Really, we got mixtapes and stuff coming out, but we ain't really as focused on those. The main thing we focus on is our album. Get Your Mind Correct is the name of the album. Paul Wall and Chamillionaire. We got a color changing click album coming out. We ain't really named that one yet, but it's coming. 50-50 got an album coming out. Paul Wall got a solo album coming out called The Chick Magnet. I got a solo album coming out called The Color Changing Lizard. And that's how we're gonna do it, man. Take over the game.
So in June of 2002, Cam and Paul released what I've seen many people call a classic, which is the album Get Your Mind Correct. The album peaked at number 67 on the Billboard Top R&B Hip Hop Albums chart, and this album was actually nominated for Indie Album of the Year in the Source magazine. It also actually went on to sell over 100,000 copies independently, which is pretty impressive. Cam and Paul really started to buzz off this, but unfortunately, things would soon change. You see, the thing is that Cam and Paul just grew apart, to simply put it. They obviously grew up with each other, but as they got older, they started to separate. You see, Paul is what people would perceive as a more approachable dude. He was always outside politicking and very friendly, while on the other hand, Cam was more reserved and kept to himself. Cam even admitted himself that Paul and him have always had this good guy, bad guy relationship where Cam would be the bad guy. They were just two different people. Paul would bump DJ Screw music, RIP DJ Screw by the way, and Cam didn't really like Screw music and said that it gave him a headache. But like when most things go awry, especially in music, is when money gets involved. When Cam and Paul started making money is when things started to get different. Paul thought that they should go one way with the money, while Cam thought that they should go the other way. Paul went on to release a solo album on Paid in Full called Chick Magnet, and that released in February of 2004, but that album, at least for Paul's career, was The Calm Before the Storm, as we'll get into in a bit. After this album is when Paul Wall went back to Swishahouse, and now things were different. And now Paul was buzzing as a rapper. Chamillionaire wouldn't return to Swishahouse, and instead he would start his own company called Chamillionaire Entertainment. Cam was very outspoken about this decision and said that he wanted to be a boss. He didn't want to sit on a label and have someone tell him how much money he could make. He said that Michael Watts, who co-founded Swishahouse, makes all the money and tells his artists how much money they could make, and he didn't want to do that. Another thing that's interesting is that on B4, Paul Wall revealed that when him and Cam released Get Your Mind Right, they weren't really cool and they were just forcing something by going in the studio to make music and forcing it to make money. But after Cam moved on from Paid in Full, he was on his independent grind for a little minute. He would drop his legendary first installment in his Mixtape Messiah series in February of 2004. Saying this mixtape was huge was an understatement, and I mean that in size and the amount of attention it got. First things first is that this mixtape was a 3-disc set. Yes, 3 discs. The first disc I think was 22 or 23 songs long. The second disc was a screwed and chopped version by OG Ron C, which featured mostly songs from CD 1, but also some of the tracks from CD 3. The third CD had over 20 songs, and actually there was a hidden song which was The Weatherman, and it actually featured Paul Wall. Here's the song.
I'm the weatherman, ain't nobody stopping my reign. On top of my game, they decapitate the top show and bang. They knocking my fame and beaters cause of rocks in my watch. If you was smart, you watch the rolls that's on top of my crotch. The rocks in my watch is more than a rocky sand lot. You jealous cause you bought diamonds from Diamond Shamrock.
But yeah, according to Chamillionaire, Mixtape Messiah sold 40,000 copies in the first month independently. On this album, Cam was really going in on a fellow Houston rapper, which is Mike Jones. Who Mike Jones? The one and only, you can't clone me, not playing. But I will say that this beef between Cam and Paul escalated because of something Cam's brother said in a song. He said something about Paul Wall's mom, and obviously it didn't really go well. Now on that B4 DVD I was talking about, when they were talking about this, DJ Vlad was being interviewed and he talked about this situation and said that Chamillionaire's brother said that he wasn't trying to diss Paul Wall's mom, and the line that he said in the song was supposed to mean something else. Before I move on with that situation though, I do want to touch back on the mixtape, specifically on the track The Truth, where Cam addresses the situation between him and Paul, and he said that he didn't have a beef with Paul and said that they didn't hang out or rap together, but there was no beef and that he didn't have a problem with Paul. He also said the main reason why he would never get on Mixtape Messiah and disrespect him is even though he was very upset at some of the things Paul was saying at the time was because Cam had respect for everything they had been through together and Paul was like a brother to him. He also said that he didn't have a problem with Paid in Full. On the track, Cam also revealed why he didn't go to a major label at the time, and he even explains that people didn't realize when he left Paid in Full, they still had songs on him, and he had to start all over from square one. Instead of turning in a whole other album, he just left. He tried to fight for the songs, but he just let them keep what they had. This will come back up later. Now back on the Paul Wall and Chamillionaire's brother situation, and in November of 2004, Chamillionaire's brother showed up to a nightclub where Paul Wall was known to hang out often. Chamillionaire's brother, sometime throughout the night, was attacked and they tried to take his chain. Chamillionaire's brother would go to his car and get a gun, and then police caught him and he ended up with a felony charge against him and he faced 5 years, but ultimately he beat the case. Now this situation between Cam and Paul was a lot more serious because things got physical, and there's a song Cam and Chamillionaire's brother did called Go Ahead, and Chamillionaire's brother explains what happened to him at the club.
I see you in the club and you trying to jump me, you know what I'm saying? With about 5 other dudes with your boys or whatever, you know what I'm saying? So the funny thing about that is this fool was only punching me in the back like a little gal or something, you know what I'm saying? And you been shooting too many slugs, boy, I hear you, you know what I'm saying? So you ain't shooting no more slugs this way without taking no charge back, you feel me? Now you want to be a G. Now you want to sip the bar and blow the dro. And you was a grown man in your 20s wearing SpongeBob watches from Burger King. I seen you in the source, man. Don't try to front like you wasn't. And all y'all old fans, y'all know, this boy was rapping about Gucci tampons and diamonds in his boogers, you know what I'm saying? And finally, you a G. You used to claim the North Side. Now you talking about you on 5'9" in South Lee. No disrespect to South Lee, you know what I'm saying? But Paul Wall, you a perpetrator. You ain't from there.
At the start of 2005, we would see the release of the album Controversy Sells, which was obviously released after both Paul and Chamillionaire left the record label Paid in Full. We don't have to look further than the title of this album as to the reason why this album came out. But also 2005 would be the year that both Chamillionaire and Paul Wall would blow up as solo artists in the middle of the beef. Paul Wall would drop his album The People's Champ in September of 2005, and it would peak at number 1 on the Billboard 200, selling 176,000 copies in its first week. This album would obviously be a success, and the singles for this album were crazy. You got Sittin' Sideways, which is a classic, and that peaked at number 93 on the Billboard Hot 100. Girl, which is another classic, and that originally debuted at number 95, but peaked out at number 35. And then you had Drive Slow, which actually just went gold this year, I believe, but that's another one. So safe to say, Paul Wall was really out here and was buzzing crazy, but a couple months later, Chamillionaire would come along and drop his debut album. In November of 2005, Chamillionaire would drop The Sound of Revenge, and that album sold 130,000 copies in its first week and would peak at number 10 on the Billboard 200. I forgot to say that both Paul Wall and Chamillionaire's albums that they dropped this year are both platinum today, but anyways, like I said, Paul Wall was definitely popping when he dropped his album, and Cam's album did alright at first. The first single for the album, Turn It Up, would peak at number 41 on the Billboard Hot 100, but that second single would be astronomical. We all know Riding, and I know I was like 4 when this came out, so I don't know like the true scope of how huge this song actually was in real time, and I heavily had to rely on research, but most viewers of this video already know how crazy that song was. That song would originally debut at number 88 on the charts, but 8 weeks later, it would move from number 12 to number 4, where it would stay for 2 weeks. Eventually, it would peak at number 1 and stayed there for 2 straight weeks. That song ultimately stayed on the chart for 31 weeks. This song was also the best-selling ringtone in 2006 with 3.2 million buys. At the 49th Annual Grammy Awards, Riding won Best Rap Performance by a Duo or Group and received a nomination for Best Rap Song. I mean, I can go on and on about how big the song was, but y'all already probably got the gist of it. Both Paul and Cam was popping, but by 2006, Cam was on fire. But also in 2006, a song would drop that would put an end to a lot of beefs that was going on at the time, and it happens to be from one of my favorite rappers of all time, which is Pimp C. You see, Pimp C was released from prison in December of 2005. But while he was in prison, he had already been talking to people about some of the beefs that I'm about to talk about in a second. In July of 2006, Pimp C would release his album Pimpalation, and on track 3 on the album Knocking Doors Down, we would see Pimp C call several rappers out to squash their beefs. He called out Lil Flip and T.I., Paul Wall and Chamillionaire, and Slim Thug and Zero. Pimp C wanted to bring everyone together because if they joined forces, more money could have been made between all of them. Also, in the music video for this song, Pimp C has another verse at the end, and he talks about how since he dropped Knocking Doors Down, people in the song sorted out their issues. Mike Jones and Chamillionaire shook hands. Paul Wall and Chamillionaire were talking again, but weren't rapping yet. And then Pimp C said that T.I. and Lil Flip were still on that boy stuff and were acting like kids. Gotta love Pimp C. Paul Wall, during a Vlad TV interview, even cites this song as kind of like the beginning of the end for the beef. He said that Pimp C had conversations with the people he name dropped on the song behind the scenes beforehand, especially with Chamillionaire and Paul Wall. Paul Wall also said people like Bun B and E40 were talking to them as well. When Pimp C put the people he name dropped on the song in the song, it really made it hard for the people in the song to run from it, especially since it's a very memorable part of the song. I mean, it's in one of the first lines in the first verse. In this Vlad TV interview Paul did in 2015, he really gives an insight on how the culture was in Houston at the time during these events. He said that people in Houston always had this friendly competition where people were competing to put on Houston harder than the next person to be the best. At some point, that competition turned into rivalries where people weren't trying to put on for the city and were just trying to put down the next man to put themselves up. The beef after this song really died down, and the two kept on bumping into each other a lot throughout the years, and in 2010, Paul and Cam would actually go on a 21-city tour titled In Love With My Money, which was named after a song on their first album together, Get Your Mind Correct. This is what Chamillionaire had to say about the tour in an interview. Originally, Paul had his own tour plans and I had my own tour plans. But for a while, I had been thinking me and Paul should just go on tour. We kind of had been talking about it, but never really did it. So I was at the point where I was willing to sacrifice some things because I feel like it would create more excitement if both of us go together. It's two artists, but it's one show. We both perform together. It's back and forth, but we close out together. It's not like he performs before me and I come after him or vice versa. It's one full show. There's a lot of people that are familiar with my work across the nation. That's cool. But before I put out Riding Dirty, Paul and I were a group a while back. A lot of fans that are familiar with the history will probably show up to the tour. They would also do numerous interviews, and they did one such interview with Complex together, and they both gave more insight behind the beef when it was going on. Paul would say, so for a while, it seemed like I had a couple of radio hits that were popping before his were, so he was more popular on the mixtapes when we went our separate ways. Then Still Tippin' came, and They Don't Know, and Sitting Sideways, so I kind of had a little bit more radio hits at first. So I'm thinking, man, I ain't even worried about Chameleon, cause I'm feeling like I'm bigger than that. So when you hear that Riding Dirty, all of a sudden it's put in my face that he got a song that's a hit too. And it's like just a little bit of jealousy, especially for me. The main time was when we was at the MTV Awards and he won that award. And then Paul would go on to say this in that same interview. I just remember my homeboy got married in Cancun, so we went to Cancun, and I remember my boy T Ferris gave me this beat to this song I had called Break 'Em Off, and he said, I want you to write to this song, and the verses just wouldn't come out because I had this mental block. I went in the studio and I'm thinking, dang man, why I can't win an award? And it took a while for me to really it took a lot of praying, God, just why I can't let this go, man. Paul Wall just said to himself, why couldn't he just let this beef go? He talked to T Ferris, and T Ferris asked why couldn't he just congratulate Cam and why Paul was just so jealous. Paul came to the realization that T Ferris was right and he didn't have Cam's information at the time, but he hit his manager and congratulated Chamillionaire. Chamillionaire at the time actually thought something was behind that move though. After Paul sent that text though, he said that it felt like the monkey was finally off of his back, and in 30 minutes he wrote the whole song for his song Break 'Em Off. In the same interview, Chamillionaire talks about things from his perspective, and this is what he had to say. I'm talking about Still Tippin' came out, and like everything Paul was jumping on with like freaking Nelly, and you like, oh man, you had to hit me with the Nelly, hit me with the Kanye West. Oh man, ain't no way now. We need to quit. It's over for us. But meanwhile, we in the public like, yeah man, we about to shut them down. And meanwhile, we over here shaking like, man, that boy just got on Rap City, man, freestyling. But we just stayed focused. It just shows you how far you can come when you focus on your craft and just trying to get it. He said the same thing, and you just have to stay focused because a lot of things will break your confidence. But if you stay focused and want it bad enough, you can achieve. But this was just a little bit more insight behind the beef, and something else I wanted to touch on before I closed it out was that Paul Wall still wants him and Cam to drop another album when the time is right, but things are a little different than how they were. Chamillionaire isn't retired as a rapper, but he's up to some crazy stuff in the tech world and only releases music in his words whenever he feels like it. I know that there was a lot of issues with Cam and labels later on in his career, but now he's making moves in the tech industry and this seems to be going very well for him. Paul Wall is still kicking and doing his thing, releasing music and representing for the state of Texas to the fullest. For this video, I mainly wanted to just focus on the beef and his backstory to kind of where we are now with it. To my knowledge, nothing crazy has really happened between the two since like the early 2010s, so I kind of just stopped the story like right there. I'm really glad that I did this video because I wasn't super duper familiar with Chamillionaire's early work and how much of a monster he was before he really blew up with Riding. Also, before I leave, I gotta mention that in 2006, there was a DVD that featured both Chamillionaire and Paul Wall before the fame. It's called Before the Storm, but I just thought I should mention that I never seen it, but I know that it's out there, and if more people want to know about their rise and come up, I suggest that maybe go watch that. We can be here all day discussing and going back and forth with this beef, but I feel like I covered a huge majority of it today and told a great story in the process of two people putting aside their differences, and that is what it's all about at the end of the day. All in all, tell me what you guys thought of the video. I'm out, y'all. Peace.